In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Dear friends, in preparing the sermon for this week, I decided that, because I came upon some interesting research about a chapter in history which I think is really interesting and relevant and pertinent to us, especially in the times that we live in. Usually I talk about spiritual things or I talk about the Gospels, but I thought maybe I'll start talking about some big boy subjects. There was a moment during the French Revolution, which I hope you're all generally familiar, the revolution in France at the end of the 18th century. Essentially, Freemasons decided to covertly and even overtly, by a coup d'etat, overthrow the old French government, which was called famously the Ancient Regime. The Ancient Regime is just the old Catholic monarchy which reigned in France for centuries. This was then replaced by a Freemasonic government with a Freemasonic constitution. The history is very complex and multifaceted, and books and volumes and volumes and whole things have been written about it. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about more specifically was one moment during the French Revolution. It had already been kind of ravaging for a few years. The new Freemasonic government was put in place, and the new organ of power, so replacing the king and replacing the kingly tribunals and all the old levers, they were replaced and supplanted by the National Assembly, which was a parliament. It was called the National Assembly. But it was made in the image of this Freemasonic doctrine. The government was Freemasonic, and they professed separation of church and state, things like that. One of the necessary things for the Freemasonic government was to destroy the power of the faith and destroy Catholicism in France. Obviously, a large part of the concern is the power of the clergy, because the clergy do, at the end of the day, represent this priestly and this churchly power. And you have to understand, putting yourself in the minds of those who don't have the faith and who hate our religion, priests and bishops, they represent this foreign power, this power of the Pope who lives beyond the mountains, right, the Alps. So the French, they look at Italians as those living beyond the mountains, living on the peninsula, this dressed in white who prances around in his palaces. He has all of his agents everywhere. His bishops who control large swaths of territory, and his priests who sing his doctrine everywhere. In every nation. It's like a king that's able to send soldiers into every kingdom. It's unbelievable power. The National Assembly decided that it would be necessary to constitute a secular clergy. A clergy that literally worked for the government. A bunch of government agents who were also priests. So they needed to separate this clergy from the power of the church and effectively separate this clergy from the church and make this clergy, these bishops and priests, subservient to the government, loyal to the government, employed by the government. In order to do this, the National Assembly gave forth this thing called the Constitution for the Civil Clergy. And this would be the name, the civil clergy would be the name of the government, the officially recognized governmental clergy. And all of the priests who were going to be members of this clergy, they would have to swear an oath. And this oath contained an oath of allegiance to the country. Okay, that's not that bad. We all have to love our countries and contribute to them. But it also contained an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, to its principles, an engagement to defend and promote the principles of this Freemasonic Constitution. And that's where it becomes problematic, because that Freemasonic Constitution said many things that were against our faith. And also, mainly, the Constitution took powers away from the church that have to belong to the church, such as, most importantly, the nomination and election and consecration of bishops. Now, if we are even somewhat familiar with history, we would know that kings and governments and princely powers have for a very long time tried to control the nomination of bishops. And that immediately makes sense because of how powerful bishops are. Right? Let's say you're Duke of Derry, and this is your city, and the walls, it all belongs to you, and there's a standing army. But there's a bishop here, and everyone listens to the bishop because he can excommunicate, he can suspend, he can do all these different things. He can declare a day of fast. Bishops are powerful people. The Duke is probably thinking, okay, this one's getting old. Hopefully he'll die soon, and I'll have my brother be elected the next bishop. Then we'll be on the same page. We'll never raise taxes, both at the same time. We'll always be able to do it. Like, we'll never step on each other's toes. And whenever I want to do something, the bishop will never resist me. Right? So for all of history, basically all of history, governments have tried very hard to control who the bishops would be. This goes back centuries and centuries. So that was nothing new. However, the church has always fought that, because by divine right, it goes to the Pope to decide who the bishops are. Because the only authority above the bishops is the Pope. He is the one. Beyond that, a bishop does not have any superior, any chief that he obeys to, save for the Pope. The Pope decides who the bishops are. And then the bishops decide, the priests and all these things. That's how the Pope indirectly controls everything in the church. That's the nature of the church. So this decree that constituted, no, it's the government that decides. We will look at the priests, we will decide which one is worthy to be a bishop, and we'll decide where he goes. And then we'll write his paycheck. It's against our faith. So you can imagine this oath went out. That was in 1791. The revolution had started about 2 years prior. There was already a lot of bloodshed. Things had kind of settled. It was an uneasy settlement. But this oath went out, and all of the clergy, all of the priests everywhere were supposed to sign it and swear it. Because these would then be the civil clergy who were loyal to the regime. It was very interesting. It was about split down the middle. 50% of the existing clergy would sign the oath and make the oath. The other half would refuse. The half that refused the oath, they were called refractory priests, because refractory just kind of means broken off, because they're broken off from the rest, right? It's almost pejorative, that term, refractory priests. The other priests were called juring priests, because juring is just, to swear an oath. Now what's very interesting, and this is here we're getting to the meat of the question, what was the conduct of Rome when all this was going on? Because this took a long time, and there was lots of news that went back to Rome, and the Pope was aware of these things. What was he writing and saying to these priests, the ones who had signed the oaths, and the ones who refused? And this is what I was reading this week, and it was extremely interesting. The Pope had very, very harsh words for the clergy who swore the oath. Many, many, many priests, thousands of priests, 7 bishops, one of which was a cardinal that signed the oath. And the Pope had very harsh language for all of that clergy, and especially in his letter of condemnation, which was in 1791. He wrote one letter in particular, which was a letter of condemnation, specifically of the bishops. Because that's where the whole thing, that's where the real part of the problem was. Are these bishops going to leave the Catholic Church, separate themselves from the Church, and align themselves with this government and become government employees? And then they're bishops, so they'll be able to ordain other government employees using sacraments? And I do have to say, what really shocked me in reading this, obviously before Vatican II, whenever there's a serious occasion, popes are very capable of adopting a very harsh tone. And I'm not easily surprised, but I will say I was actually quite surprised by the tone and the tenor of what the Pope was saying about these bishops, and especially the cardinal who swore the oath and became government employees. He called them things like worthy successors of Judas, serpents, traitors. And I'll just throw this out there, the official name of that encyclical letter was Charity. I found that funny. The bishop found it funny as well. Maybe not so funny. I thought it was very funny. there's one term that he uses above all to describe these clergy, the priests, the bishop, and then the one cardinal, who swore oath to the allegiance to the government and thereby cut themselves off from the Catholic Church and became just tentacles of this Freemasonic, godless government. He calls them over and over again intruders. They are intruders. Why intruders? Well, it's because they are priests and bishops. They have a priestly character in their soul that can never be removed. That's the nature of being a priest or being a bishop. You will be that for eternity. And if, God forbid, a priest or a bishop is in hell, they will be a priest or bishop in hell for all eternity. And people can see it. They will see that is a bishop, a Catholic bishop. And likewise in heaven, and it will be to their glory. So they have this holy mark upon their souls, this holy stamp that cannot be effaced. They can say the Mass, they can hear confessions, they can ordain. They have these holy powers, and yet they use it for wickedness. They are intruding in our holy place. And they're not worthy of these powers that they have. They're intruders. Now, this is obviously very interesting. It's history, but it's very bygone. It was quite a while ago. I do think there's a bit of a lesson that we can take from this period in history. Because essentially what it all boils down to is the compromise, no matter what the benefits are. And for these poor priests who were in that situation, they were given the ultimatum, the dilemma. Swear this oath and you can continue being a priest, wherever you already are. You'll stay there. We won't move you around. You can stay curate of whatever. You just have to swear this oath. And then the poor priest is thinking, well, I can continue sanctifying the people, administering sacraments to them, celebrating funerals, celebrating marriages, preaching, hearing confessions. All I have to do is just make this oath, which cuts me off from the Catholic Church. But if I refuse to do that, what can I do? I can do barely anything. At best, I could sneak from farm to farm and say Mass for families. But my parish of 800 people, 800 souls, it's a tough choice. Admittedly, that's hard. But history would not look favorably upon these people who compromised. Because that's our religion. And this comes even from the Bible. St. Peter in his epistle, he said, it's a famous phrase, Non faciamus mala ut veniant bona. Let us not do wicked things in order to obtain good things. The ends don't justify the means. We can't do sins. We cannot commit sins in order that good may arise. We can't do that. A compromise is. Now, let me make this more practical because we can continue learning. Example. These priests who celebrated very valid masses, these were real priests, legit. Everything was in Latin. This was the 1790s. And their stuff would have been better than ours. They would have had huge churches and wonderful organs and silks and tapestries. Yeah, it would have been great. Real masses. And yet the Pope issued a decree telling the faithful, you're not to frequent these priests, you're not to go to their Mass, you're not to hear their sermons, you're not even allowed to go to them in order to baptize a newborn infant. It is preferable that you stay home and baptize your own infant than go to these priests, these intruders. What that shows us, this is very important, the Catholic faith is not the religion of sacraments. And I say that knowing full well the sacraments are capital for our sanctification. I hope all of you may live very sacramental lives, going to confession as often as possible, receiving communion as often as possible. The sacraments were created for our sanctification. But it is not the religion of sacraments. We don't just win by receiving as many hosts as we can, are going to as many confessions as we can. We go to heaven if we have the faith and if we live the faith. Part of that is receiving sacraments. But we cannot sacrifice part of our faith for a sacrament. And that happens. Like those priests who signed their souls away in order to celebrate Mass. And Catholics at that time in that situation, very unhappy, very unfortunate situation. They were told to not go to those Masses. There are Masses that we cannot go to. Now, as I said, making this very practical and very actual. How do we say it? Actual in English. Very, very current, sorry. Are there good, dignified Latin Masses that we actually shouldn't go to? I think the logic is there. Now, we don't have a functioning Pope. I think the Pope has lost his mind utterly. We don't have a Pope to write us letters and say, these people are intruders. But we're reasonable, we're adults, we can think and we can deduce. Are there Masses that are in Latin that we probably shouldn't go to? Celebrated by priests who are in various states of compromise? I think so. I think so, really, I do. And all of this to say, every priest that you talk to is going to have his list of places that you can go and you can't go. Don't go there. Including us, I guess we have our list too. And I'm keenly aware that sometimes maybe it might appear like battling restaurants, warring for clientele. No, don't go there. The spaghetti. You'll get sick. Come to our place. I get that. But the reason I'm bringing up this chapter in history is just so that you can see there's nothing more Catholic than being discerning. Above all about the faith. Yes, the Mass, you can find the Mass. That can be found easily enough. Even the true Mass. The Orthodox have the true Mass. That Mass is truer than ours. The Orthodox, all of their stuff comes from the Middle Ages. They're the real traditionalists. All of this, that's 16th century, 17th. I mean, of course, it's the eternal Mass, the color and shape of our vestments, but the Orthodox, all of their stuff is exactly how it was in the year 900. Can we go there? Of course not. It would be a mortal sin to go to an Orthodox Mass because they're schismatics. They're separated from the church. So, even if, at worst, even if a priest is battling for clientele, oh yeah, come to our place. It's the only place in town. Even if he has that temptation, at the end of the day, you do understand there is a duty for Catholics to discern. Like those poor Catholics in that situation, when they had nothing else actually. Those poor Catholics in the French Revolution, they were told by the Pope, not even for a baptism. That's not to say the child couldn't be baptized and couldn't go to heaven. Of course, the child could be baptized at home. But that is not supposed to happen. The child is supposed to be baptized in church and supposed to be registered in the parish registry. The priest is supposed to be there. The godparents are supposed to be there. Not even that, because these priests were intruders. What about all these Latin Masses that we find with priests who are somewhat compromised, more or less compromised with Vatican II? And again, I will preface, I personally know many priests in those positions, in the what we used to call the Ecclesia Dei communities, but the Ecclesia Dei Commission was dissolved. So I guess we just call them the Latin Mass community, the Institute of Christ the King and Good Shepherd and all that. These are good priests, and they know their stuff, at least the ones that I know. They know their stuff. They are devout, they are serious, they are zealous. But as far as we are concerned publicly, they have signed that they are A-OK with Vatican II. It's fantastic. It's great. And then privately when you talk to them, they say, it's nonsense. I know. But as far as the world is concerned, and as far as the Pope is concerned, and as far as all these wicked people are concerned, you are A-OK with it. You think it's grand. Is that okay? Can we do that? Can we sell just a tiny bit of our souls in order to have whatever wonderful seminary with these huge ceremonies? And admittedly, like for example, Christ the King, every Easter, I look at the pictures of their Holy Week because I know it's going to be a lot better than ours. Their stuff is great. I wish we could do stuff like that. With Cardinal Burke, our Holy Week is getting pretty good, you have to admit. Still, yet Bishop Leaney has to become a cardinal. But, that's on the way. But their stuff is amazing. And it's edifying. But what isn't edifying is the compromise. For example, Christ the King in particular, I do know of at least at the seminary that they have in Italy, which is very, very close to the city of Florence. Every Holy Thursday, because in the Novus Ordo there's the big concelebration on Holy Thursday, and all the priests have to come and concelebrate with the bishop in the new Mass. One of those priests, the ones that wears the beautiful garb and the Latin and everything wonderful, one of those priests, I don't know how they do it, maybe they take straws or something. One of them every year has to go and concelebrate in the new Mass with the bishop on Holy Thursday. And I'm sure if you talk to them and say, oh, the new Mass, no way, horrible. That's what they're willing to do. But, dear friends, that is not our faith. We don't do that. We cannot do that. If we could do that, there wouldn't be any martyrs. There wouldn't have been a single one. Because every single martyr would have said, wow, I need to still take care of my family. I owe that guy some money. Now let me just burn this incense, and then I'll be able to live, and I'll be able to keep praying and going to Mass and doing all these good things. So I'll just burn the incense, and I'll adore some false gods, and we'll forget about it pretty soon. We wouldn't have a single martyr if we were allowed to do these things. And our church is built on the blood of martyrs. There's nothing more glorious in our faith and in our religion than a martyr. That is the model for every single one of us. That would be the best grace we could ever receive, would be to be a martyr for our faith. Not compromise the faith. Heavens. God forbid that we ever compromise in that way. Again, these are good priests. And they have qualities. And probably at some level they're misled. They're probably told by the people that they trust, the very smart, very serious people that they trust, that this is okay and you can do it. But I'm sorry, a priest has a very little excuse. I think no excuse to be misled. A priest cannot be misled. We have to know. That's our duty. Because otherwise then we'll end up misleading other people. Well, why not? Why can't we? No. So please see in this moment in history that I've described that in our faith we cannot compromise things, even for the Mass. Even the Mass, even if that's taken, if it's at the price of losing our faith, we don't go to Mass. That's what real Catholics do. Real Catholics. We cannot lose our faith in order to go to Mass. As bizarre as that sounds, yes, but the Mass that gives the faith, yes. But that's not more important than the faith. That's not more important than God's honor. So, in conclusion, I do hope you see there is a reason that every priest, even them, of course in their minds, we're crazy, we're horrible. It is normal that a priest would say, no, you can't go everywhere. We can't do that. Now, if there are personal motives involved, then God have mercy on the priest. But at least for yourselves, discernment is necessary. It is necessary. We cannot go everywhere. So, whatever the case may be, whatever may arise or befall us, pray always for the strength to keep your courage, the strength to resist the compromise. That is clearly what's happening in the world right now. The devil is trying to constantly tempt us through applying pressure to us and presenting us with a wonderful compromise. Just do this one thing and things become so much easier. Believe me, so much easier. We can't do that. I don't know how bad things are going to get. Will it get to the point that we're being martyred? Hooray! Honestly. I don't know. I think that the devil, he learns and he gets smarter as time goes on. 2,000 years ago, he would just feed Christians to lions, in a certain way, even though that's horrible, that's grotesque. That might be easier than going through a long, drawn-out period of persecution, to be chewed on by a lion for 30 seconds, and then immediately you're in heavenly glory. I'm not disparaging the efforts of the martyrs, but to go through a long, drawn-out, decades-long persecution, that requires real strength, real courage, and we have to pray for that, because otherwise we'll be like so many who compromise. And that is not our faith. Our faith is a God-man, crucified to wood. That is not compromise. That's principle. So let that always be our example. Let us always pray for the strength to remain faithful to God, to never compromise. And please God, He will always give us strength. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.